Welcome back. I'm Brandon, the HBAR Bull, once again joined by Zepsi. We both do some contract work for the HBAR Foundation, but we don't do these weekly updates in any official capacity. We're just here personally to give you the latest in the Hedera ecosystem. Welcome, Zep.
How's it going, Brandon?
It's going good. We have a lot to cover this week, but as always, none of this is financial advice. Use it for entertainment or educational purposes only. So we have, like I said, a lot to cover this week. We had a SpaceX engineer get on a community space. That was really exciting. The same week that Rob was talking about how Starlink and SpaceX might be a key component to banking the Bankless. So that's going to be fun to get into. We also had COP28, which was absolutely huge. And you're going to be getting into some of those details as well. But first, I wanted to start with something a little bit lighter, something in our gaming space. And we're going to be going back to the Reality Plus team. We've talked to them many times in the past. They have a few projects going on, but they have a new one on a very popular TV show that's has a lot of fans. So I caught up with Tony. He's one of the co-founders of Reality Plus to give us some details. Tony, we've covered Hedera-enabled products Reality Plus has been involved with in the past, including Road Code, which was featured in the Tour de France, and the officially licensed FIFA game Own the Zone in the World Cup. But can you refresh our memories on the Reality Plus business in general?
Yeah, so we were founded back in 2017. So we're kind of a kind of pioneer in Web3. We were there right from the beginning. And previously to that, I've worked in video games. So all the way through my life, I've been involved in all types of gaming, from console to PC to mobile, even social Facebook gaming. And one of the views I've always had is work with big brands. In my view, a brand brings me millions of players. The next thing is to make sure you have a fantastic game. So that's what we've tried to do at Reality Plus all the way through, is work with big brands and then execute those properly. And one of the brands that we are, or one of the companies that we're working with now, is the BBC. And the BBC brings me lots of great brands. So for next year, a big focus of ours is to work with the BBC on a number of projects. The main one being Doctor Who, which right now is back on TV with its latest series. It's getting fantastic reviews, and we have a worldwide license to create a digital trading card game. The game's actually called Doctor Who Worlds Apart. It's live now. You can go onto the website and you can play the early version, the beta version of the PC game, both on Mac and Windows. It launches on mobile in the new year, with the official worldwide launch in April. And this is something that is hugely exciting because the brand itself brings a wealth of content. So we have the rights of Doctor Who going all the way back into 1963. It's actually its 60th year anniversary right now. And then we have the past, the future, including all the new bad characters and good characters coming out over the next 5 years. So it's one of those games that will constantly get updated. And the idea is that just like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering or Gods Unchained, as a digital trading card game, people can trade cards through our marketplace, which brings us on to working with Hedera. So Hedera is our favorite chain. And through the game itself, we will be creating Hedera wallets, everything minted on your chain. I'm really building that partnership going forward with you guys.
Tony, you mentioned that there's a beta version of the game that people can play now. How else do you expect the Hedera community to engage with your products going forward?
Yeah, so the way that games launches go is you very rarely see a game launch worldwide on day one. So firstly, this game has taken nearly 2 years to create. This isn't a new license which we've managed to sort of make a game in a couple of months. This has been something that we've been working really closely with the BBC on. And in fact, we actually have been selling packs of digital cards for the last year. And we've been selling those cards early before the game comes out for a number of reasons. The first reason is you start to build a community, you start to gather a fan base, people start talking about it. And then secondly, we only sell a limited amount of packs of cards. So in fact, we sell 10,000 packs. And once we've sold out of that pack, we never release the cards that come in that pack again. So you're starting to build up a community, and you're starting to build up a fan base that want to get these cards before they sell out, and also to start creating their decks so they're ready when the game comes out. So that has been happening, and we've actually minted, I think it's now getting on to 1.5 million cards, which is quite incredible considering the game literally soft launched a few weeks ago. So we know we've got a great fan base. The way that, going back to the question on how you launch a game, is you do what's called a soft launch. So on mobile, it's very rare that you would get a mobile game that launches worldwide on day one. The way that it works is you normally have a 6 to 12 month soft launch. 6 is normally about right. I have seen some go 12 months, but that's a bit long. And you tend to roll out in countries that are not your key countries to start with, because you're making sure that
smaller markets, sure.
Yeah, you're kind of making sure that people can play the game. There's no bugs. You're fixing problems. So you gradually move out into bigger and stronger countries. So the last country in April, when we launch, April 2024, will be the UK and US, right? There are big territories. And by then, that 6-month roadmap would have gone, and would have fixed any issues and added more into the game. And then we launch then. On PC, it's slightly different. PC, you can launch worldwide. But again, as long as you make it clear that it is a beta. So as I said, if you actually go to the website now, you can buy cards and download the early beta of Doctor Who Worlds Apart. So you can play away.
Very exciting. Like I mentioned, you've already had some exciting products with, Own the Zone and Road Code, and now you're getting into games around TV shows. Let's zoom out just a little bit. What's your broad vision for the future of the Reality Plus and Hedera partnership? Well,
we want to have one chain and one blockchain provider. And, And when we started the business, we initially made our own sidechain. So we created our own sidechain, which was on the Ethereum mainnet. And when you wanted to export your NFTs, we bridged with chains. And that's really all you could do at the time. But the issue with that is a lot of users don't understand blockchain, don't understand the different chains, don't understand what gas fees are, and it can get really complicated. So we just wanted to work with one company like yourselves that would seamlessly be integrated into our platform. So when a user bought a pack of cards, or in fact, stepping back, when a user even joins Doctor Who, registers as a new user with simply an email address and a password, we create you in a Hedera wallet. To the user, it's an account. They don't even know that it's a blockchain wallet. And the reason being is we really want to bring Web3 to the mass market. And the mass market don't care about the technology, don't care about what happens in the background. They just want a really fun game that is seamless. And I go, do you know what? You can trade these cards in our marketplace. And I don't mention the word NFT. I call them digital collectibles. I don't mention the blockchain. It just should happen. And that also includes then exporting them outside of our game into an external wallet. We want that to be a one button press. We don't need people to choose different bridging, different chains. People just won't understand that. I just want to export it. Here you go. And again, it seamlessly works. So our, and what we like about Hedera as well is you can do that because of the speed of your network. So people aren't waiting. The cost of minting can be built into the price of the cards, right? It's not like suddenly you've got to wait for a gas fee that could be more than the actual pack of cards in the first place. All of that stuff is just another wall in front of someone, which is going to make them go, exit. So I think it's important that we work really closely with Hedera, integrate you seamlessly into our platform so users can literally just go through it without even knowing that that's happening.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for swinging by today and explaining it. And we can't wait to interact with both your Doctor Who NFTs and the game. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So Zeb, one of the things that struck me was how beautiful the design was for their game. I think they're hitting on all cylinders there, and they're going to be rolling it out next year. So I think 2024 could be a big year for us. But we also have some other gaming teams that are putting out some graphics as well. We have Astronova and Earthlings coming out with some game graphics as well. Now, Astronova is a meta RPG game known for their deviant sidekick characters. They moved over to Hedera from Ethereum just last year, and I really like what we're seeing come out of their team. And like always, Earthlings did not disappoint with a clip of one of their villages. They've already had some of their land and village mints, and those can be picked up on secondary markets like Centex, but they continue to impress every time they come out with stuff. Now, Zep, I do want to get right into COP28 because we had a lot going on as far as the Hedera ecosystem at that event, a lot of announcements, a lot of engagement. Can you give us some information about what you saw come out of there?
Yeah, so I mean, over the past week at COP28, I think we've seen two things. We've seen A, an increasing demand for the carbon markets, and B, an increasing demand for the technologies that will help them scale. Earlier this week, we even saw, Ursula von der Leyen, who's the president of the EU Commission, saying herself that climate finance needs to move from billions to trillions. That's billions of dollars of carbon credits to become trillions, and all the other sort of components of that climate finance ecosystem. And for these carbon markets to scale, the Hedera Guardian, which is of course a core component of our sustainability ecosystem, is the world-leading platform for DMRV, which is a crucial component of bringing trust and scalability to these carbon markets. In other words, in order for global organizations to offset their carbon, and in order for us to scale from billions to trillions in climate finance, we need the Hedera Guardian. And this places Hedera at the center of a projected multi-trillion-dollar industry. A multi-trillion-dollar industry that has its future on-chain. And the amount of value that we could see as on-chain real-world assets is staggering. Already we've begun to see Alcott, which began onboarding their 500 million metric ton portfolio of carbon credits, but I really think that is just the beginning. And so this week at COP28, we found out that the UNFCCC, which is the climate impact arm of the United Nations, who hosts COP28 and is the main voice behind climate finance, is now directly involved in the Hedera Guardian. So together with Envision, who maintain and manage the Guardian, with Swirlds and with the Sustainable Impact Fund, they came together for upgrades to the Guardian to increase accessibility to the methodologies which underpin the carbon markets, including the UNFCCC's clean development methodologies. Those are some of their main climate methodologies, which are now within the Guardian ecosystem, and they've been working to make those as discoverable as possible. Alongside that announcement that the UN was directly involved in the Guardian through the UNFCCC, we also saw that another team called Hyphen had begun the creation of their own new Guardian-based methodologies. And these methodologies, again, which are crucial underpinnings of the carbon markets, were basically there to help improve greenhouse gas measurement and reporting and verification, and thus, by doing that, improve the overall carbon credit quality and its value. Carbon credits can really vary in price. And it is crucial for teams like Hyphen here to be making sure that the crucial components of those carbon credits are as trustworthy as possible, so that the carbon credits minted on Hedera are of that highest value in the chain. So that was the first two announcements. We had the UN, we had Hyphen, and then came DEMIA. And DEMIA was founded by the ex-IOTA Foundation core team, especially within sustainability. And they've implemented their suite of privacy-preserving technologies into the Hedera network. And so this zero-knowledge proof-esque functionality, which is now in the Guardian, is a crucial prerequisite for institutions with highly sensitive information and data to scale onto the public network, which is Hedera, where the Guardian sits. So I really think that we're opening the floodgates here for the institutions that can now be on there, know that their data is protected, only the people who need to see it can see it, and also the carbon credits through Hyphen are even greater quality. So we're hitting there on the quality side, we're hitting there on the scale side, we're hitting there on the institutional adoption side. And so all of this is to say that just in a matter of a week, we've seen the largest institutions in climate finance backing the Hedera Guardian and the core voices behind these institutions declare that this market needs scaling to trillions. So I think we can sort of safely say at the end of this week that the future of climate finance on Hedera is extremely bright. And I mean, one of the craziest things sort of alongside that is there's another announcement that's been pushed a bit later, so it'll be coming after COP, but there's another one coming within this realm of climate finance. And so all I've got to say is, watch this space because it's one of the most exciting. I know it's not the sexiest, it's not like the DeFi, it's not the gaming, but in terms of real world utility, this could be the use case that takes Hedera to every single major organization that needs to offset their carbon. And, that's going to be a long-term process, but the amount of value I see coming on chain from this industry could be more than any other aspect of this industry. And that's all happening on Hedera. So an exciting week for COP28, a lot to digest, but a very exciting week.
So yeah, Zep, I mean, the reason why some of those other things are exciting is because they're retail facing, right? So people get to engage them on a daily basis. But if we just do some math around what you were saying, if these are multi-trillion-dollar markets, and Rob Allen, made it fairly clear that from the initiation to the expiration of these carbon credits, you could be talking about a few cents for every single one. And we've talked about the value or the cost right now of these carbon credits having a huge range between $5 and $80. Well, when additional trust is added to that, maybe it gets up to $100. But you take a several $trillion-dollar market divided by $100, and every single one of those is multiplied by a few cents of revenue for the Hedera network. We could be talking some really huge numbers here, especially if we take the majority of the market share, and just like some of the other networks have established the first mover advantage on NFTs or in that DeFi space. If we establish, first mover here, and it sounds like I've said in the past, Wes is kind of creating a moat. We will be that standard in the space. It could get really exciting, don't you think?
Definitely. I mean, and I think, one way we can make that more interesting is definitely this refi narrative. You have DeFi, you've got OnFi, you've got refi. And I think, collectively, there's a lot of broad messaging which really needs simplifying, as was highlighted by No Man's Internet on my comments on Twitter. And I think that really is our task going into the next years, is making this incredibly lucrative market for the network that bit more digestible. And I think refi will be the umbrella term for that. And it's really, it's up to us as, the organizations and the networks and the community members to really come together, figure out what that messaging is, and then just, send it.
That's it. All right. Well, it's nice to be in pole position in one of these verticals. So I know Rob is big on climate finance. He's explained it very thoroughly several times on Shark Bites. Now, we go down some different rabbit holes this week on Shark Bites, but it's definitely entertaining. So let's check it out. Welcome back, Rob. How's your week going?
Hey, Brandon, it's great. We've got plenty going on, and I've only got a short period this week, so let's get into it.
All right, we'll jump right into it. We'll start off. Crypto Cash has 3 questions, and I'll tackle the first 2 before we move on to the third. He asked, how satisfied is the council in their involvement with Hedera's community? What steps are they taking to get the community more involved? So are those kind of conversations taking place at the council level, Rob?
We do touch on community. I've only been on one governing council meeting since I came back, so I can't talk to the ones in the last 2 years since I dropped off. But very, very interested in what foundation and association are doing in terms of community engagement. The council doesn't have a particular remit for kind of direct community involvement. Obviously, marketing comes out of Swirls Labs and Christian's team. Foundation is actively engaged with startups and the developer community through the accelerator programs. Associations similar. So from a governing council perspective, no direct involvement. However, there is a very keen understanding and very keen interest in the grassroots adoption of the Hedera network in general, because those are the things which contribute to the success of the organizations within the ecosystem. It's not the hottest of hot topics that the council have to deliberate on, but certainly it permeates everything that we do, because we can't. The council isn't in an ivory tower. It needs to be cognizant of the community, both the enterprise ecosystem as well as the startup ecosystem, and the community that feeds both of those, because the developers of the world are the ones that are largely driving some of these decisions about technology adoption, and we would be foolish not to engage.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. His third question was, is there any chance of a community DAO as a council member? Reventh87 had a similar one asking, will the Hedera Council ever have a community DAO occupy a seat? Now, to start off, we've asked this question to Mance in the past. Of course, the community is very engaged and is a good size entity, right? There's a fair amount of people involved in the community, but even in DAO form, like what Mance has said in the past, I don't think it checks all the boxes to have a direct community representative on the council. But I think there is another way it could happen. We could have one of the teams that are building on top of us, a Galaxy or a Karate Combat or a Saucer Swap, grow to the size where they do check all those boxes. And then you could get an HBAR on the council. That's another way we could do it, beside, of course, somebody like you, Rob, getting on the council. That's fairly straightforward as well. But
yeah,
Rob,
that was my first point. If an HBAR like me can be on the council twice, then that's not to say that the council can't be full of HBAR. We just come through the mechanisms and through the processes to get there. And I would welcome a lot more true believers and dyed in the wool HBAR on the council. We have many, as you know, the very vocal council members such as Scott and Duncan and Ian and many of the others are true believers in the benefits of the Hedera network in their sectors and general. But I think we're talking about the base community that kind of feeds the ecosystem and the pyramid for Hedera. And I mean, I've been a public supporter of the idea of an organization such as the Foundry representing an entity, representing the community, the builders, on one of the organs of the council. Maybe if not the actual council itself, there are committees, there are, there's a corporate utilization committee, there are not currently, but I could foresee mechanisms by which the community voice could be heard in some of the council instruments. So not yet, but I think it's a very, very good idea. And I've spoken to the Foundry about this very thing. There's a potential in the future where this might be the case. But as you say, currently the membership rules are fairly specific, and as we talked about in the past, even big enterprises getting over the bar and getting onto the council is pretty tough. So we should definitely continue to keep lines of communication open with the community. I'm always available, so and I get a lot of outreach from the community through the various socials that I participate in, and I'm always happy to answer questions if I'm able to. But for all those reasons, I think there are many ways to influence the council, but ultimately it's there for a particular purpose with a very specific set of rules. So I think you'd find it fairly boring, most of the community members actually being on the council. That's not to say that we don't do very, very interesting things, but the decisions that we make and the time it takes to make those decisions is deliberately thoughtful, controlled, and sometimes ponderous. But we'll definitely keep those potentials open.
Fair enough and well covered. To stick with the council, we have another one from Reventh87 who asked, how serious is the council in tackling misinformation about Hedera as it is plentiful within the crypto community? Now, this is something that it's not just the council, but I'm sure Swirls Labs thinks about this, and the Hashgraph Association, the HBAR Foundation. How do these entities think about misinformation within the crypto community?
It's frustrating for all of us when we know the truth and we see the FUD, we see the noise, we see the deliberate misinformation. The council itself needs to stay true to its course, and its mission, and therefore, from a council perspective, just keep on going. Right? There's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be FUD, and not just in the crypto space, and not just for Hedera. Everywhere you look, it's very difficult to believe or know what to believe online these days, and these are wider societal challenges that we've seen emerge over years now. So it's not just specific to us, and you can't tackle every point of misinformation from every random person on X. Although I know you and Zepsi like to do battle with most of them. And that's great because they do need to be taken down a peg or two. They do, that some of that FUD needs to be tackled head on. But from a council perspective, it's, stay the course, stay true to what, we are doing, to, be mission focused and keep calm and carry on. That's not to say I don't feel like, getting down in the trenches sometimes and doing battle because, that's the sort of thing that I love to do. But, I delete my tweets more often than post them when those things happen. I think we just need to keep on providing the information, from all of the outlets that we have. The marketing team, the foundation does a great job in just pushing out the truth, right? And just keep on pushing it out. And the community has a duty to amplify that and amplify it in a way that maintains the truth, because that doesn't break the trust. And stay the course. Just don't get drawn into the toe-to-toe battles with diametrically opposed positions that you're never going to convince everybody because they have their truth and they're particularly focused on their chain or their app or whatever. It's probably best not to engage with them, but it is very frustrating sometimes, I know.
I do get down in the trenches, and rarely do you convince the person you're talking to. It's more for the other people that are watching the conversation and trying to get the truth out to them. All right. Now, this next one is really interesting because I know you're a futurist, or describe yourself as a futurist, and also a payments guy. So Fanxia 3100 made the statement saying, to bank the unbanked, you need Elon Musk plus Hedera, Elon Starlink plus Hedera to be exact. So what are your thoughts on this, Rob?
Yeah, it's a great point. Banking the unbanked kind of phrase is one that has been, clearly with us for as long as there have been unbanked, which is forever. I wrote a book in 2018 with my co-author, Sophie Blackstad, called FinTech Revolution. And it's all about banking the unbanked. It's all about applying technology. 2018, I think it was the first reference of Hedera in published form. I'll lay claim to that. But those who are underserved by the banks, and the banks see that as the 1 or 2% below their threshold, when actually there's a billion or more, under at the bottom of that, and subsistence living in many parts of the world is very different from those who can't get a bank account in Western countries. So if we're talking about the very bottom of the pyramid, those who are most underserved by banks, who cannot reach a branch or cannot get a bank account, or have very, very low levels of funding or income, that banks, it would be an entire loss leader for banks to provide services to them. We need a different way. And crypto writ large and the tokenization of fiat enables us to provide accounts in different ways that banks currently provide. Now, the questioner says, is it Starlink plus Hedera that solves this? I think that is a solution. Sophie, who I mentioned just now, the CEO of a company called Hive Online. We actually built prior to Hedera going live, we built a solution on the Stellar blockchain, which is very difficult to manage these days because of volatility of the token. But the purpose of the solution was to provide very small villages in very rural developing countries the ability through very basic phones, not even smartphones, $1 phones, the ability to access the both the network and store value in a way that they currently do. So they have different schemes that allow them to do this. So there's one called the Village Savings and Lending Association scheme, which is like the Grameen Bank model that came out of Bangladesh. And there are very many different variants of that around the world. But it's basically a small village location with usually the matriarchs and a metal box, a safe, where cents or maximum dollars get saved every week. Now that's fine in a village location, but actually what it enables is it demonstrates savings behavior by that community. And the savings behavior then triggers the ability to access microloans and microfinancing, and it's the microfinancing that helps for buying another cow or seeding another field, or replacing a roof that's been damaged by climate change, weather patterns. So all of these things are really, really necessary, but fly a long way below the normal banking infrastructure. So once you can provide technology, as we can, and with Hedera we can do it far better than we could have done it with Stellar back then. You need connectivity because you need that very rural village to be able to connect to the internet, to actually connect to the network, and to, in terms of trust, get into the consensus network so that the value that's being tokenized is trusted and a true token on the network. So you need that connectivity, and that's where Starlink comes in. We tried with Hive Online, with base stations and various other mechanisms, and there are many throughout Africa that are dealing with that same connectivity issue. But Starlink makes it a lot easier. So it's not Elon plus Hedera, but I think it is a Hedera plus connectivity issue that is going to solve for these problems, and very quickly will expand across the developing world because the projects have found product market fit in the location, but all of a sudden now you've got connectivity, and connectivity enables you to access consensus, and consensus gives you trust. And what trust does is it enables you to trigger the financing that allow for these subsistence farmers and rural villages to get access to funding to live and grow and succeed, and have loans to their micro businesses, which then provide for better lifestyles and more income and better jobs for those villages, and then the snowball starts, not snowball in Africa, but everything starts growing, and network effect gets achieved. So, these elements are all coming together right now.
Now, Rob, I know you're down under, but there was actually a really good space that was put on by Tatsuaki, who was talking to a SpaceX engineer, talking about all the ways that Hedera could possibly be integrated into some of the SpaceX things that they have going on. So really exciting stuff. I suggest that you check it out. Now, I know you're running a little bit short on time. Do you have time for one more?
Go for it.
Okay, let's get one more. So the last one comes from Jamilion, and he says, how's the progress with onboarding the 50,000 developers in India, and when can we expect there will be a tangible impact on the network? So, Rob, we were really excited a few months ago when we heard about some of the initiatives that are going on in India. Do you have any update on this?
Yeah, the Bharat blockchain yatra is a procession through all of the states in India with hackathons and presentations, and is intending to grow this access to blockchain technology. And we in the Hashgraph Association sponsored the thing with our partners IDS. The 50,000 developers that were being targeted were part of that journey. and it'll take some time to draw them all into the ecosystem. I believe the Yatra has slowed a little because it's that time of year, and the universities were a major part of that whole initiative, and the universities have now kind of closed down for the end of the year, and they come back in January time. But the corporates are continuing to be engaged. The corporate events are continuing to be engaged. There'll be a series of boot camps that draw in these developers in advance of the big hackathons that are planned early next year. So watch this space. I think it's gathering pace. More and more new developers being drawn in. Remember, it was 500,000 developers. Over the next phase. So this really is just that first step. But the boot camps are taking place. The education and via IDS, and the Yatra kind of trundles on, pulling in more and more. Indian developers getting more and more exposure to Hedera through the boot camps. And then the hackathon with these big prizes that were announced will really kind of showcase some of India's best talent. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they come up with. Having seen some of the great participation in the hackathons that we ran with Lumos Labs in India, and the huge number of applicants that came to those hackathons, I think this is going to take it to another level. So very, very excited to see what happens in the next year. And actually, at the association, a guy called Anindya Rao Chowdhury, he's on Telegram. And he said to me that he's very happy to people to reach out to him to find out what's going on with the Yatra, and to ask any questions. If he's able to answer them, he will.
Very good. Now, I know that's going to be a critical region for Hedera and all tech in general. Rob, thank you so much for your insights today. Thank you so much to the community who keeps giving us all these questions, and drop your questions down there in the comments and we'll make sure we get them in the queue. Rob, thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
My pleasure. See you next week. Thanks, Brandon.
So, Zeb, one of the things that stuck out to me was how Rob just happened to pick out a question around Starlink, and how Starlink could be a key component to making sure banking the bankless is successful. And just so happens, we also had a space this week put on by Tatsuaki, who we just recently interviewed, with a SpaceX engineer who got into ways that Hedera could potentially collaborate with Starlink, with SpaceX, for all kinds of things within their business. He gave us some thoughts on Hedera as well. It was a really fascinating conversation. It was an hour and 20 minutes long, so I cut that down to just a few minutes. So let's check it out.
Just to give a quick intro, we scheduled the space a couple of weeks ago. I met Shaq, or Aditya, a couple of weeks ago at Defi in Istanbul. He's an engineer at SpaceX. I'll let him introduce himself in a couple of minutes or seconds. And essentially, we started discussing the potential use cases of distributed ledger technology with blockchains and hash graph networks, and how they could be utilized in the space industry. We discussed a multitude of different opportunities where we can leverage decentralized consensus, smart contracts, and all sorts of other things in order to make the space industry work better, create new use cases and things that are not possible now without DLT. So maybe to start off, I'll just give Shaq or Aditya the microphone. You can give a quick introduction of yourself, and then we can go ahead.
Hey everybody, great to meet you all. My name's Aditya. Originally from the Bay, and then I moved to Austin later with my family. I'm currently working at SpaceX, just building out sort of internal tooling on the Starling side of things. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I met Cheyenne at Dev Connect, as he was mentioning, and thought that there's a lot of sort of interesting opportunities and collaborations that could be made between both of our projects. I think there's a lot of potential applications. I think that we've been discussing as well that I think we'd love to share on the space. But it's great to have everybody here.
Shaq, the first question I have for you is, I sent you a lot of material and videos of Hedera and how Hashgraph is kind of different from blockchain. Before we get into the discussion of space, I just want to know your general impression. What do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously still fairly new to the product, but I mean, from sort of my reading so far, what I understand is that, it's sort of virtually sort of limitless TPS, right? So literally the ability to perform trillions of transactions per second and also, a ridiculously sort of low energy consumption. So, I mean, if you combine both of those, you essentially got the ultimate sort of scaling solution. I think that it's really interesting to see, especially in that talk you sent me about, sort of with Dr. Lehman Baird. He was also sort of mentioning having the ability to securely transact not only data, but also sort of currency and value in such sort of a high tier infrastructure and sort of very scalable infrastructure. It becomes very, very interesting, especially when you combine that with some of the stuff that we're working here at SpaceX as well. I think some points that I'd love to sort of potentially talk about later in the space is okay, how can we sort of potentially leverage this to combine with Starlink, potentially to have like almost like sort of a distributed storage, and also provide the ultimate tier of redundancy, right? Literally having your servers off the planet, and sort of also providing sort of a seamless end user experience through that is very interesting to me. I think also the concept of, and maybe we can talk about this later, but also supply chain management for space, having sort of the ability to position and track, sort of. So I think that was actually brought up just now. I mean, position and track sort of satellites and sort of leveraging hashcraft to perform all those operations is very interesting. And also the idea of maybe also material management systems. A very core part of SpaceX is sort of our ability to execute and out execute others on sort of our management processes. And so I think by having sort of an even more meticulous form of tracking for parts, literally inventory, how that maybe relates to what we're building is also sort of a novel, interesting collaboration, an area for collaboration. But would love to maybe talk about these more at extent later on in the call for sure.
Actually, the first thing I want to ask you, so I introduced you to the Hedera consensus service, and I told you a little bit about the limitations of the Ethereum virtual machine. So even if you create the most efficient, fast DLT in the world, you're going to be bound by the limitations of the EVM for smart contracts. So Hedera is actually the fastest DLT when it comes to EVM transactions as well. However, the Hedera consensus service is able to do 10,000 transactions per second today. And with sharding, as you rightfully said, it's able to basically scale to infinity. So I was wondering, how do you see the use case of a public notary system of sorts, or a system that can essentially enable distributed consensus for any sort of application stack without the need of implementing a smart contract? How do you see that as something that could be relevant to, for example, a company like SpaceX in the space industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess you can start out with this like concept of like I think we were discussing this earlier, right? Like the StarNet, basically like a combination of like Starlink and Hashgraph, essentially. And I think that the proposal that we were talking about was essentially turning each Starlink satellite into like a node on the Hashgraph network, and essentially creating like an intra-satellite network kind of that's capable of facilitating super fast transactions on any kind of data. And that could potentially make this sort of the network resilient to, obviously attacks on Earth's server infrastructure. I think we're discussing like it was like 8,000 sort of servers are essentially running the internet these days. If you were to potentially take that off the world, I mean, that's super interesting. And Hedera's hashgraph technology, I think, could be particularly useful just because its ability to process transactions in parallel rather than sequentially, I think, could also enable sort of high-speed data transfer and transaction processing. Also, I think you mentioned sort of its use of Merkle trees and DAGs for data storage could also ensure that the files are tamper-proof and have sort of an increased availability. So, I mean, entire applications, websites, and platforms could literally be powered via this theoretical StarNet. And it essentially removes any dependency on sort of Earth's server infrastructure, which I think is super interesting. It could also potentially become sort of the most effective payments processing infrastructure on credit card networks, for example. If credit card networks wanted to sort of get involved, I mean, that could be interesting as well. But I mean, there are also kind of, challenges to this idea to consider too, I think, and there are also challenges to keep in mind. Firstly, I mean, both Starlink and Hashgraph have robust security measures in place, obviously, but combining them into sort of a single network would sort of, you'd have to plan that out and also carefully consider any potential vulnerabilities and threats of that, including, maybe data interception, signal jamming, even like physical attacks, just ensuring that everything is sort of tamper-proof. The technical feasibility of that would also have to be considered, maybe require significant sort of modifications on the satellite's infrastructure to accommodate for sort of the new infra that are like sort of the new solution. And it would also require sort of a way to handle the vast amount of data that would also have to be generated and stored in order to make this a feasible and viable option. Obviously, also all this data would inherently be more expensive since, you're storing it off the world. So there's that consideration as well. There's also potentially regulatory and legal issues. If you have like a global network that could face regulatory and legal challenges, it essentially becomes a point of concern for sure, especially in terms of like jurisdiction, data privacy, compliance with international laws and regulations, right? Like if the satellite is literally not bound to sort of one geographical region, then like what would that look like, for example? And also the cost and maintenance of such a network could be super costly. Just significant investment in the research and development component of this, actually building out the fundamental infrastructure, and also ongoing maintenance and support would have to be considered. But definitely an interesting sort of application, I think. And I think sort of one of the most interesting applications that we've been discussing over the past couple of weeks. But obviously would love all your thoughts for sure.
Shaq, we've got someone in the audience who's asking, first of all, he's saying this discussion is great. Zooming out, how do you view SpaceX overall interests in the crypto space? Are they open to it, agnostic, or already heading down a specific path?
Okay, I don't want to speak for the company for sure, but based on sort of my understanding, let me just sort of touch on sort of our conversation earlier, Shine, right? Like, I think SpaceX's priorities are very, very like kind of simple to understand on the surface, but I can like explain it further as well, right? Obviously, like every single business, like in the history of businesses, obviously wants to lower cost, operating cost, and increase total revenue, right? And so anything and everything that we can do to do that is like literally sort of interest to SpaceX. And so, that's basically like what we're doing internally right now is like literally building out tools to reduce sort of operational costs and expenditure, reduce the amount of that we're having to like sort of bleed out on contracts for like merchants and whatnot, right? Toss away sort of potential revenue and that we could be collecting. And so I think, from the perspective of like Web3 and sort of crypto, it did show sort of, interest by, I think SpaceX reportedly held, I think close to 400 mil of like Bitcoin on like its balance sheet in 2021 and 2022, but it later sold it. Obviously Elon is Elon, so in May 2021, he like might've tweeted that like one of SpaceX's missions would be paid for entirely in like Dogecoin, just as like a meme, so, I think it's like, it's interesting, but I think it's, if you want to fundamentally sort of generate any form of like a formal partnership, I think there needs to be sort of innovation in the space of total operating expenditure needs to be lowered and lessened and need to be made more efficient, and overall total revenue needs to be bolstered. And so whether that comes in the form of sort of internal innovations, right? Like we were, discussing about, or fundamentally like sort of new products that are being generated, like this sort of StarNet concept, like tokenization, for example, as long as it sort of impacts its bottom line, SpaceX is interested pretty much, I think is sort of the position of the company. But obviously, please take that with a massive, massive grain of salt. I'm not the CEO, obviously, but, that's just my understanding. But I think also that's fundamentally like why this collaboration is also very interesting to SpaceX, right? Not only is there efficiency and speed, there's predictability and stability, like we just mentioned. There's reduced transaction costs. You also have mitigation of sort of any exchange rate risks and sort of any sort of risks for fluctuating sort of, if we were to engage in the Web3 space, any risk for sort of fluctuating exchange rates. And also, I think it's very interesting just to come from the perspective of everything is fundamentally secure as well. Just, due to the fact of sort of the underlying technology. On top of that, I think like there's also like the concept of like literally RWA tokenization here too, right? If you have like a token service, which I believe y'all do, you basically enable the configuration, minting, and management of fungible and non-fungible tokens on Hedera with ease, right? And you also have asset tokenization that offers sort of increased performance, security, and scalability. and could honestly be used to sort of represent physical and virtual assets that SpaceX has, like literally that live, and you could essentially maybe even like have these live on the blockchain in order to provide sort of a high degree of token compliance and configurability. And on top of that, I think also maybe onboarding our manufacturers and our suppliers onto the supply chain could be interesting, where like payments could also occur, right? Like automated. You could integrate into like DHL's API, for example, to be like, okay, well, if this was initiated, then like this transaction should go through using like some sort of a smart contract. Also be interesting. So for payments could also be interesting.
So Zeb, we're going to take one of our hard left turns. We had an announcement come out from Amplify this week. Do you have any more information on that?
Yeah, so they're holding the sort of music space on Hedera, kind of MusicFi / Web3 streaming, fan engagement kind of side of the ecosystem. And they're a all-in-one platform that connects artists with their super fans. And the very exciting thing about this is that they already have 100,000 plus artists ready to join. They've got millions of fans between them. They've got tens of thousands of emails, i.e. email users that are a part of this ecosystem. And they've got over 2,500 new Discord members. So it looks like we're going to be onboarding a lot of new people into one application on Hedera. And then that kind of funnel of community engagement, I hope, will pique their curiosity, that we'll start seeing them in different Discords, on Twitter, and that kind of thing. But this was set up by Irfan, who was one of the founders of Dovu, and also one of the lead members of Kasabian, who are a British rock band. So they've got both the ability to execute on Hedera through Irfan, and then they have, this massive sort of industry presence of the Kasabian band member. And so I really think there's a cool intersection here that already has a lot of momentum behind it, given the amount of artists they're onboarding. And I'd really like to see, that take off as the next application within music on Hedera.
And I'm going to be catching up, hopefully, with their team. We're still trying to organize it, but I'm going to try to catch up with their team for an interview next week. So we're going to have some more information coming out there. So another thing that we heard about really early in the Hedera ecosystem was Project Starling, and it's trying to bring trust in the time of deep fakes and everything else. Now, it was over an hour-long video, and I suggest everybody go check it out because there was a lot of great information in there, but I caught some highlights that I thought people might be interested in.
But yes. The short story is signing documents. How do you know in 10 years that document is still valid? Well, the answer is we use distributed ledger technology to ensure its sort of long-term survivability.
Sure. So Starling Lab was co-founded by the Stanford University Department of Electrical Engineering and USC Shoah Foundation. And our work is really applied research. What we do is try and address questions about provenance and preservation of important digital records. That could be anything from a photograph to a video to databases. It might be a web recording. Anything that is subject to what we increasingly hear about in the worlds of misinformation and disinformation. We're trying to figure out how do we address in real-world solutions, real-world proofs of concept, ways to help people understand what sorts of data and records they can or cannot trust. Sure. Well, so Starling in our research works across 3 different practice areas: journalism, law, and history. So we teamed up with Guy on a project related to journalism, and specifically with Reuters, who we had partnered with before. And we wanted to try and figure out ways that authenticity data could travel along with photographs that they produced through a professional newsroom workflow. Now, it's one thing to actually do things conceptually and to try and figure out how do we sign things, in a more academic sense. But how does that actually work in the day-to-day operations of a very busy, very robust newsroom where they've got a lot to do in terms of not just taking a photo, but you think about the whole life cycle of that from the moment of capture on a camera when the light hits the sensor all the way through different steps of normal photo editing. You think about permissible edits like color corrections and crops. And then ultimately to distribution. And then how do audiences find that information and then find ways to verify that it is the original photo as it purports to be. So we teamed up on a proof of concept that was published by Reuters involving a Canon camera that was signing on device and allowing us to follow that piece of information, or several photos, I should say, across their life cycle until they were actually published online and made available for people to inspect with the provenance data fully embedded and also registered through distributed ledgers. In terms of which cameras can do this, we were using a prototype Canon camera, which was used primarily just for this proof of concept in terms of our work with Canon. And it shows the capabilities of the technology to sign on device. However, I think if you take a step back and look at the whole industry, there is rapidly a shift towards this. So before I mentioned CAI, the Content Authenticity Initiative. And if you look at the people or the organizations and companies that are members of CAI and who are behind C2PA, you see Canon, Sony, Olympus, Leica. So right now, increasingly, we're seeing press releases every few weeks, it feels like to me now, about brand new, very high-end cameras that support C2PA, which is the spec that I mentioned before, and can support signing on device. So Leica, for example, has a new camera available. It's not cheap. It's about $9,000. I think there are other cameras out there that we'll see in the next 6 to 12 months, which will be much more affordable. And I think there have been some announced already that are less than half that, depending on the manufacturer. So increasingly, not only do we see hardware developers adopting this, we're also seeing the ability to capture this on mobile devices. And there is free open source software that is available today that people can download from most app stores, including for iOS and for Android. One example would be Proof Mode, which is available from the Guardian project. And on Android and iOS right now, it works a little bit differently. In Android, you can just have it running in the background while you're capturing any images through any of your existing apps. On iOS, you would just want to go through the app and use the camera within the app, but you're able to sign information, at least on a software level, there. And so the future of this field is really promising in terms of the infrastructure. Today, we see a number of very viable options, but not widespread adoption yet. If we're having this conversation 6 months from now, that might be a very different outlook.
I mean, I can see why Reuters wants to be able to, without beyond a shadow of a doubt, prove that all the images that it's putting up in its content are traceable to something that's trustworthy and the veracity of it cannot be disputed.
And it might be kind of hard to see if people are streaming this and it's low bandwidth, but you can see how there is a lightened version of this image which was used in final publication. To me, as a consumer of news and media, that's a perfectly permissible edit. I can also do a side-by-side view like this, which might be easier for people who are streaming this right now. And again, able to tell what was done. What is great is that if something else were done with, let's say, adding Firefly changes with AI to do auto-generative fill of an area, content credentials are being automatically added to a lot of this AI imagery, the generative AI imagery that's being produced. And it would display, assuming that information has been provided, within this as well. If it's not made available, let's say it's stripped out, the use of independent databases, blockchains, distributed ledgers, allows us in the future to verify that and to cross-reference, so that even if someone strips out that metadata, you can go and find this, using perceptive hashing or things like that. And you can then further inspect the credentials of a piece of content, even if the authenticity metadata were stripped out.
The Starling project. I mean, you guys are literally at the bleeding edge. I mean, I think of you as a systems integrator here. That's what innovators do. They take a bunch of parts and they find a way to integrate them when they don't naturally fit together on their own. Seems like that's what you're doing, and you're actually bringing a real solutions to bear right now that are very meaningful. What's coming next for the Starling project? Starling Labs,
well, it's exactly it, and thank you very much. But it's that integration of all these technologies and all these players in this space. So it takes people like Guy and ProvenDB and Hedera, Filecoin, Canon, Reuters, practitioners, especially to actually do this. So for us, it's about finding practitioners to work with on these applied projects and showing the art of the possible, and then hoping for those proofs of concept, those case studies to continue to drive industry adoption. For us, we're looking to continue to team up with journalists, with people who work in the legal accountability space, especially on war crimes, and also people who are doing work around archiving and historical preservation. we are very excited looking ahead to certain aspects of 3D technologies, anything driven by a 3D engine. So maybe that's a VR headset you put on your head. Maybe it's something rendered from images that were 2D to create a different perspective altogether. But how do you know the underlying scan was accurate? So we're doing some really interesting things with that, recreating historical scenes and capturing current scenes. Perfect example to think about when we talk about quartz is what if a crime scene is changing because of weather or because of other circumstances. You might want to capture that in a 3D scan and make that admissible in court. Well, how are we going to meet those standards that courts have? And there isn't a lot of VR in the courtroom. And I'm not saying that it's going to become part of the everyday part of the courtroom process, but those are some of the interesting and novel ways that we could start to look at ways to apply authenticity data to projects which have very real world implications for people.
So, Zeb, it sounds like what Project Starling is doing is going to be critical going forward, especially now that we have even more enhancements with deep fakes when it comes to AI and everything else. Okay, again, we're going to have to take another hard left turn here because I want to get into Karate Combat just real quick because we're going to cover Karate Combat 43 in depth next week. I'm going to be going to the event, but I do want to give everybody a heads up because I am going to that event. This show is probably going to be a day early, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that if you are going to participate in up-only gaming, you need to get your tokens in your wallet before the snapshot, which is usually taken a few days before the event. So I might not have another opportunity to remind everybody. Make sure early next week you get any tokens that you have in DeFi or whatever else into your Karate app before that snapshot takes place. And with that, we'll go ahead and get into some network analysis. Over the past week, the Hedera network has processed 1.24 billion transactions with a max TPS over 8,800. We averaged over 2,000 TPS, but at the time of recording, the throughput has dropped to about 600 TPS. This is very normal, and we see it when Atmio, our largest user, is making adjustments, and often results in an even higher TPS later on down the road. We're still maintaining under a 3.5 second time to consensus finality, and we've also seen an impressive 68,000 accounts created over the last week. Looking at our fungible tokens, Wrapped HBAR takes the top spot, followed by the Xbucks token from the travel company Zenny, Energy Trade token, the native token of Saucer Swap Sauce, and the meme coin Zero. Also in the top 10, we see Karate, the native and bridged versions of USDC, Dovu, and an Earthlings game token placeholder, PH Steam. Looking at our NFTs, Road Code Access is in our top spot, followed by Cream Pets. We also see a couple Saucer Swap liquidity tokens, an Earthlings NFT, Blade Wallet loyalty token, codes, the times, the Karate Combat themed Karateka characters, and HBAR Barians the Lost Ones. And with that, we'll get into some DeFi. Taking a look at DeFi Llama, not including Stater Liquid staking, the total value locked in the Hedera DeFi ecosystem is at $44.4 million. Saucer Swap holds $41 million, and HeliSwap makes up most of the balance. Taking a look at the returns on Saucer Swap's trading pairs, HBAR X is at 4.7%, 23% on HBAR Sauce, HBAR USDC version 1 is at 21%, 94% on version 2, and 45% on HBAR Karate. Over on HeliSwap, HBAR X is at 3.5%, 131% on HBAR Heli, 15.9% on HBAR USDC, and 59% on HBAR Karate. As some of you know, I've been getting into it with some Solana community members, one of which said that Solana was faster for DeFi. I went and tested it out and found that Hedera was significantly faster, under 5 seconds, compared to 12 seconds on Solana. The guy I was talking to said it was possible on some Solana dexes to reduce the number of confirmations to make it comparable or even faster than Hedera. As we know, depending on the blockchain, there is a recommended number of confirmations. For Solana, that's 32, which would be 12 seconds, just like I experienced. Now, Hedera's hash graph isn't probabilistic like blockchains and has true finality, so we don't have to worry about confirmations. But it just sounded dangerous to me to reduce the number of confirmations to get more speed. Moving over to the crypto and HBAR markets, Bitcoin and Ether had good weeks, up 13 and 12% respectively. Many altcoins did even better, and HBAR was no exception, being up 5% on the day and 16% on the week to 7.1 cents. Hopefully, we flipped 6.8 cents to support, and I'd be looking to 7.6 cents for resistance. If we break that, we could see some resistance at 8.5 cents and the early year high at 10 cents. All right, Zeb, that's pretty much all we have. Is there anything else you'd like to pass on?
I mean, there's two things I'm extremely excited for. I think when it comes to gaming, we haven't seen much on the mainnet yet, and so we haven't really unlocked that potential. At the same time, we've seen other ecosystems like Avalanche come out with all these games, but from what I'm seeing, from some of the teams that are building behind the scenes, they are of far, far greater quality than the other ecosystems. Some of these other networks have sort of, they've front run this narrative and they've got loads of startups in, but the quality isn't there. They've just got a big ecosystem of, say, tokens, which is, has value in its own right. But some of the teams we're seeing now building gaming applications on Hedera that we're going to be seeing going to the next year is staggering. And then you combine that with the fact that we are the leading, the world leading platform for DMRV, which is a core component of the future of carbon markets and therefore the future of climate finance. And that means that all of that will be coming on chain in some degree with Hedera at the core, I think is just staggering. There's consumer engagement on one side, and then you've got that really, really hardcore institutional adoption that it seems that is being ignited on the network as we speak. And so for me, COP28 has to be the highlight of this week, and I just don't see that slowing down. So an exciting week all around. Shout out to the SIF team. Shout out to Wes, his vision there, and I have no doubt that that's just going to keep on going.
Well, I mean, for you, because you're following this stuff from the beginning, it's already staggering. But as it actually comes to fruition, I think the rest of the crypto space is going to be staggered out of what's being built in our refi ecosystem. All right, so next week we have a few things going on. I'm going to get a hold of Dane again. We're going to go through Karate Combat 43, maybe help you with your up-only gaming a little bit. I am going to try to get a hold of the Amplify team for a quick interview there. And of course, we're going to get Shark Bites. So make sure you drop your questions down there in the comments if you have anything for Rob. That's all we have. We'll see you next week.